All right, everyone. Whitney, thanks for having me. And my name's Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. I'm a farm advisor based in the Delta region. I'm actually based at the San Joaquin County office, but I serve growers and consultants and industry in the Delta region. One of our upcoming, well, it's actually a crop that's been grown in the Delta for quite some time. Acreage is starting to increase, and I'll show a table about that, but it's rice. And so I've taken on a few extra projects in rice to try to help growers as more and more get into this crop. And today I'm going to be telling you about some herbicide trials that we've been conducting. I've been working in cooperation with Corteva Agriscience. So this presentation is going to focus on the Delta rice production system. Kasim Al-Khatib will be speaking after me today, and he has a breadth of experiences in both water seeding and drill seeded systems. In the Delta, all the acreage is exclusively, it's completely drill seeded, which you can see in the background picture. The reason for this is because the soils where rice is being grown in the Delta are high organic matter soils, and the soil itself is very fine. And so when my predecessor, Mick Canterbury, and some of these early Delta growers were starting to work on rice, they found that water seeding just didn't work. The soil particles would go into suspension into the water, and then the seed would be flown on, and then the seed would get buried just too deeply, and it wouldn't germinate very well. So they switched over to a drill seeded system, and it works very well for these growers. So you can see the acreage. It's San Joaquin County acreage has been increasing actually by about 15% each year. And then the estimate there for 2021 includes a little bit of Sacramento County, the Delta acreage of Sacramento County. Weed control is, so after the rice is drill seeded, growers will come in, and before that rice is emerged, they'll often apply a glyphosate herbicide to get any grasses that have already emerged ahead of the rice. If the rice has emerged, they can't do that because the glyphosate would, of course, kill the rice. So it's a timing issue. They have to be spot on with their timing, or else that glyphosate herbicide just doesn't work. Assuming they've got their timing right, the rice will then germinate, and that rice germinates due to soil moisture. So they're planting into moisture, and that's what's getting the rice up. Once the rice is about 3 to 4 leaves, they'll put on a pre-flood herbicide program that I'll show a table. It'll show you all the herbicides that they're putting on at that pre-flood 3 to 4 leaf stage. Again, timing is of the essence, whether it's that glyphosate application in the beginning before rice emergence, or whether it's their regular herbicide program pre-permanent flood. Windy conditions in the Delta, they tend to, well, growers this year said, when wasn't it windy? So the windy conditions can compromise optimal timing for herbicide applications, but you know, growers are pretty good at adapting to the conditions, and to my knowledge, you know, they're still getting it on even if they're up early in the morning and working on Sundays. So now in light of a changing environment, which is our theme for the workshop today, how can we use the principles of IPM to effectively manage weeds in general, but also in this Delta rice production system? So of course, IPM is a process for solving pest problems while minimizing risks to people and the environment. And it focuses on this long-term strategy of prevention, primarily of pests. Central to IPM is proper pest identification. So in this case, making sure we've identified the weeds and we know what we're trying to get at, and really isolating or identifying the herbicides that will work on the weeds that are present. And of course, some general IPM questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're monitoring for any kind of pests are, has the pest met some sort of critical threshold? If we've established through research over time that there is a critical threshold above which we would consider treating the pest. And if it's not met that critical threshold, can we live with it? Is the pest at a population below which it'll be okay? We can still meet our goals for production. So of course, IPM uses a breadth of strategies, including biological, cultural, mechanical, and chemical strategies to prevent and manage pests. Pesticides are part of an IPM program, but it's important that we monitor for pests and use them when the pesticides are necessary. We use pesticide products that are primarily affecting the pest and minimally impacting other organisms. We rotate chemistries whenever possible. And when I get into the research update of this presentation, I'll be talking about chemistry rotation and why that's important. And then of course, we always advocate for reading the pesticide label. In rice systems, whether it's in the Delta or in the Sacramento Valley, weeds are arguably the most important pest of rice systems. Integrated weed management uses cultural and chemical practices to manage pests. As an aside, those of you who work in rice know that another pest that I'm not basing this presentation on is weedy rice. And those first two strategies there, prevention and sanitation, we know are important management practices for weedy rice. So prevention can be using certified seed. And sanitation can mean, making sure your equipment's cleaned out so that you're not moving a weedy species from one field to another, from a field that you know is dirty with that weed to a field that's clean. But in general, water management is extremely important. And Whitney and I collaborated on some projects this year where we observed kind of erratic water management and therefore the weeds just got away from the grower. So water management is incredibly important in rice systems. And of course, monitoring, as I've previously said, and herbicides. Herbicide resistance is a problem in many weed species and many crops. So Anil already has talked about how horseweed and hairy fleabane have herbicide resistance. And the same can be said for many of the weeds that we have in our rice systems. So it's important to make sure that we're rotating chemistries so that we can still get at those weeds. The definitions there on your screen, herbicide resistance is the ability of that weed to survive a certain herbicide, even though we know that herbicide should work on that weed. So over time, spraying that herbicide, the weed has overcome it, is able to tolerate it, and therefore you see it survive when that herbicide's been applied. And again, rotation is extremely important to try to manage herbicide resistance. So the research that I'll be talking about now in the next several slides is looking at a new chemistry in rice. It's called Loyant, and it's a product that Corteva Agrisciences has been marketing. They've got it registered in the southern US. So it's not a new chemistry altogether, but it would be a new chemistry in California. It's not yet registered. And they had hoped it would be available for use in 2021. However, there was a slow up in the registration process, and so it wasn't available in 2021, but Corteva anticipates California registration very soon. Company trials indicate that it has good efficacy on broadleaf weeds like duck salad and red stems, small flower umbrella sedge, and rice field bulrush. And these company trials also indicate that it has some activity on Echinocloa species, the barnyard grass and water grasses, that we have in our rice systems. I'll be talking especially about those grasses in my trial work. So we set up these trials to try to understand what would be the weed control efficacy and crop tolerance of Loyant, specifically in these drill-seeded systems like in the Delta. These were the weeds that were problematic in our trial locations. In the first 2 years, we saw a lot of watergrass and barnyard grass in our trial location. We also saw a lot of sprangletop. In year 3 of our trials, this 2021 season, we had identified another field on the same ranch where there was a lot of sedge pressure. And in this case, it was yellow nut sedge, which is not as typical, I don't think, in the Sacramento Valley, but it's certainly problematic in the Delta system. So we evaluated efficacy against these 3 weeds. Now, I'll point out that the company trials that had been done for the Southern United States and even here in California had already basically shown that Loyant does not have any efficacy on sprangletop. And I'll just cut right to the chase. We saw the exact same thing in our trials, that Loyant does not have efficacy on sprangletop. That might be an important point to remember. So we trialed, in 2019, we trialed Loyant at different rates. And then in 2020 and 2021, we looked at Loyant in different combinations. So with these different products on the left-hand side of your screen, and then the rates on the right-hand side, the 2019 study basically indicated that we used a little bit higher rate in 2020 and 2021 because of the 2019 results that indicated this 1.37 pint rate. The grower standard practice is the 5th line down. So it's Regiment, Sandia, Prowl, Super Wham at MSO and a UAN 32. So that's the grower standard. And then we called the Prowl H2O treatment our control. That's a pre-emergence only treatment. And because it's a commercial field, we just worried that having a completely untreated control would result in way too many weeds in this grower's field. So we still applied a pre-emergence Prowl, and we called that our control. We looked at crop injury with Loyant and with all the herbicides we looked at. We observed some tip burning in all of the treatments, particularly in the grower treatment and any treatment that included propanil or the Super Wham. That injury symptom was usually gone by 14 days after treatment. And it was usually most severe if the water the permanent flood didn't get applied within a few days. So if the grower got delayed in getting the permanent flood, then that injury symptom, the tip burning, was more severe. But once the flood got on, we usually saw that disappear. And that was usually no farther out than 14 days after treatment. With Loyant, we saw this characteristic that you see in the photo. It's this leaf curling or leaf bending in that case. All of those arrows are indicating some rice leaves that are exhibiting this symptom. This is not a symptom that's unique to the Delta. This is something that Corteva has observed in other trials. But we did see it in our Delta location. Corteva in all of their trials has observed that when there's some sort of environmental stress, whether it be heat or cold or drought, that symptom is a little bit more severe. In 2019, we saw that symptom. It lasted no more than a week, and then the plants grew out of it. In 2020, that symptom lasted for several weeks. And then again in 2021, that symptom was apparent for a very short amount of time, days, and then it was gone. So again, it seems to be influenced by environmental conditions. But despite any of these crop injury symptoms, we did not observe any stunting or stand reduction or differences in heading. So none of these herbicide programs are impacting the rice beyond a couple or a few weeks and not impacting yield at the end of the season. Oops, I went backwards. So we observed good weed control with Loyant, but tank mixes will be needed. Loyant alone is not going to solve your weed control problems. The 2019 and 2020 replicated trials were looking at Loyant predominantly on those grasses that I indicated with the pictures a few slides ago, the Kinnicloa species and Sprangletop. Again, applications were made pre-flood, and we observed good efficacy on those grasses, and then similar yield to the grower standard herbicide program at the end of the season. But I'll reiterate, Loyant does not have efficacy on Sprangletop. So that was a weed that got away from us in these trials. In 2021, we did a couple different things. We had the same replicated trial, but in a new location that had the yellow nutsedge. Again, we applied the Loyant when the rice had 3 to 4 leaves. And the Loyant did not have efficacy on the yellow nutsedge, even though it has efficacy on some of the sedges that are more prevalent in the Sacramento Valley rice systems. But in addition to the replicated trial, we also put out a demonstration, a non-replicated demonstration, looking at Loyant in combination with some other products to get some of these grasses that had escaped that pre-flood herbicide program. So we put on Loyant post-flood when some of these grasses were already heading. The rice wasn't heading, but the grasses were. And we found that in combination with other products like Regimen or Clincher or Superwham, the weed control with Loyant helped to get at some of these grasses, especially compared to the untreated areas of the field that didn't get this post-flood treatment. So again, this is not a typical timing for herbicide applications with Delta growers. It's not, there's no reason why it couldn't be, but they've always managed to control weeds with that pre-flood treatment. And so flying on a post-flood treatment just hasn't been necessary. But as we perhaps move into situations where weeds like these common grasses are escaping that pre-flood treatment, then it looks like we have some options for a post-flood application to get those weeds at a different timing. And we didn't observe any crop injury at that post-flood timing. So to get at the main points, again, Loyant showed some leaf curling under stress conditions especially, but these were short-term symptoms that we noticed with the product. It had good efficacy on the grass species, barnyard grass, water grass that we had in our trials. Tank mixes will still be needed. It's not a standalone product, especially on Sprangletop and yellow nutsedge that we see in the Delta environment. And so these results together indicate that, you know, Loyant would help in mixing up different herbicide rotations, mixing up different chemistries in order to try to get at resistance management in our rice systems. And so with that, I'll just say thank you. The 2019 and 2020 trial results are written up in a report that gives you all the details. You can go to my website and get that. I'm still working on writing up the 2021 results. So those will be forthcoming in the next few weeks. And then I also list my blog there where I provide updates on my research program.